Today is Saturday, March 29th, 2025. My name is Grace Park, and I am interviewing Dr. Richard O on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. So, first, we're going to start with a few questions regarding your early life. So, could you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Um, my parents immigrated from Taiwan and were both doing graduate work at the University of Minnesota, and that's where I was born.
Great. How would you describe your childhood and adolescence years? Were there any special holidays, traditions, memories, or any experiences you recall growing up?
So I don't really remember anything in Minnesota because very soon after I was born, my parents moved to Iowa, I think to escape the snow, but they probably didn't go far enough. My younger brother, was born in Iowa. Um, and then by the time I was in first grade, we had moved to Texas. Um, but so most of my memorable years were, I mean, the only thing I remember about Iowa was actually playing in the snow, making, you um, igloos and snow fights and stuff like that. But no, most of my memories come from Texas. Uh, and I mean, I grew up in Dallas, so we were very close with a lot of different Chinese and Taiwanese people in that community up in the Dallas area. Um, but, I think I had a pretty normal childhood. Um, went to church there, hung out with other family friends and things like that when we were young, before we started doing all of our normal stuff that you would do in school and sports.
Great. What were your parents' occupations, and what are some of the values and lessons that your parents instilled in you growing up?
So my father is an engineer, he's retired now. My mother did more clerical, secretarial kind of work. Um, I think the biggest thing that they instilled in me was the sense of hard work. We never really had much in terms of money. We were never, rich. I never thought we were poor just because we didn't think about it. We definitely took the value of money very seriously. And I remember when I was very young, we couldn't afford a lot of things, and it wasn't a good or bad thing. It just, I went to a public school there, and it just wasn't an issue. We weren't around very wealthy people, so there was never a comparison issue. Um, but they never explicitly came out and said, "You need to do this, you need to do that." It was more learning by watching them. I mean, they were working all the time. They would fix things themselves. Um, they they would, if there's a problem, they'd just figure it out. And you know, um, I mean, my dad would even do woodwork stuff. And I mean, I didn't know if he was good at it. He just made stuff, and I see myself doing that now. I just kind of make stuff, and I was like, well, that makes sense. I think I can just make something like this, and and I think he's probably given that down to me. But I think the biggest thing is just the idea that you can do it, and you just need to work hard enough. And if you work hard enough, you can achieve it. And if you didn't achieve it, you probably just didn't work hard enough, and or somebody's working harder than you, you know. And that's kind of down to the root of who I am and how I do things. I think that they've given me a sense of just being able to accomplish it through hard work. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing that they've, given to me. And but above that, I think the other thing is just the whole sense of family. Um, you know, I wouldn't say that we're like a very emotional family and things like this. We're not, you know, there's not a lot of PDA. There's not a lot, a lot of that. But the sense of family coming first and being the most important, and what you sacrifice for, has sticks with me.
Yeah, that's very cool to see how you say you learn by watching and how that really centrally shapes your even your hobbies to this day. My next question for you is, what was your favorite subject in school, and what were some of your aspirations, or if you had any dream careers as a child?
So I've always been interested by science, and I didn't realize this, and I think I started to realize this when I think in sixth grade. I distinctly remember one of our teachers saying something about the human body and how it basically is a machine, and it does this, and I mean, this is a little bit of a gross story, but I remember it was my sixth grade teacher, and I think he may have been trying to gross us out. He said, well, diarrhea just is when you aren't absorbing your water, and then the water just comes out, and that's why it looks like that. And something in me said, oh, that makes sense. And then I realized you can look at the human body like a machine. And then it was just very interesting. And then learning about biology, how every animal's machines are a little bit different and are a little bit unique and solve these different problems better than we could come up with ourselves. I mean, when you look at it now, we're still trying to figure out how different animals and systems do these things. But just that idea has always been very, very interesting to me and very fascinating. And it almost makes things just more mechanistic. So if we knew enough or know enough, we could start to understand more about what's happening. And then, of course, the next step, once you understand what's happening, then you can understand how to fix things or repair things or, you know, make things quote unquote right. So that's probably been the thing that I've liked the most in terms of subjects.
I see. My next question for you is, in which grade were the first history classes taught? And which teacher told stories or those from history textbooks stuck out to you the most?
When was I first taught history? Wow. I'm not sure I could answer that. I'm sure somewhere in grade school they taught us history in social studies and things like that. I think one of the things that I remember fondly was Texas history, just because I just thought that was neat. I never knew anything about Texas history, growing up. So I thought that was I thought that was interesting stuff. In terms of the history that I remember, or actually, let me rephrase that. The history that was most memorable was a teacher I had in junior high. He was older. He kind of looked like Yoda, a small, short, wrinkled guy, um, very eccentric, but he would tell stories, and he wouldn't actually give you as much facts. And I think maybe he made us look it up, but it was just so engaging. In fact, I don't even remember most of his stories, but he would, when he would talk about like World War II or something like this, he would tell us these stories of what these people did and just bring you into it. And we would just sit there transfixed. I mean, half the time, I mean, I look back, I'm sure I didn't even understand exactly fully what was happening, but he was a storyteller. And I just remember just sitting there, loving going to his classes. I mean, he could just ramble for literally an hour, the whole class. And I don't, I'm sure there were times I didn't even know what he was talking about, but it was just compelling, and it made it very, very interesting. But yeah, but we did world history, um, but it wasn't even the subject of it. It was just his delivery and how he just brought you in. And I think that's probably the most memorable history that, I've taken. I'm not a big history buff, um, but yeah, that one I definitely remember.
Wow, yeah, I would love to have a history teacher like that. Um, But thank you for answering those questions. And next, I'm going to ask a few questions related to like the immigration history of your family. So I know you mentioned a little bit about how your parents moved to different states, but when did your family first move to the states, and how and why did it happen?
my parents grew up in Taiwan, uh, finished their college studies in Taiwan, and then came to the United States to do graduate work. My father came first, and then my mother came a year or two after that. Um, and they tell me the story. They didn't really know each other. They went to the same college in Taiwan. Um, and then I think she says she went to Minnesota mostly because he went there, and this way she would know somebody in the United States. I don't know how well they knew each other before. They don't really tell me much, but and I haven't really asked. Uh, but that was it, and that's pretty much the story of it. I mean, I remember when I was young, we went back several times. I don't remember it outside of pictures, um, but we would go back and forth a couple times. And then when my brother was born, we'd go back, and my brother and I don't have any direct cousins here in the United States, any relatives. So that was really the only time that I've gotten to see cousins or uncles and aunts. And it was, it's funny because my Chinese and my Mandarin is terrible. It's very bad. And I remember when I was there, when I was young, seeing my cousins. Their English wasn't great, but I think their English was actually very good. They were just embarrassed to speak English because they were afraid they had an accent. Um, but it was remarkable to me that we just got along like we had known each other for a long time. And it was special. And I miss that. And, when I see people who have cousins here, it makes me a little jealous. Um, but I always remember that. I mean, it was awkward at first, just getting to know each other. But then after spending even a couple days with them, it was just really fun and just nice to see relatives, especially not having any relatives growing up, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I think, when we have relatives in another country, it's always very heartwarming to be able to connect with them so well. My next question is, I see that you have lived in various US cities outside of Texas, like Minneapolis, San Francisco, Los Angeles. How would you describe the Asian American communities, in each of those cities compared to the one in Houston? And just what is your general impression of life in Houston?
Okay, that's a lot of questions. Let me make sure I address them all. Yes, I feel like I have lived in a lot of different cities. Um, and I would probably just list, I mean, I wouldn't count Minnesota or Iowa just because I'm too young and to really make an impression or memory. Um, I think Dallas, I didn't feel at the time, and maybe it's because I had nothing to compare it to, that there were necessarily a ton of Asians at the time when I was growing up. Um, and you know, I guess we went to Chinese markets and stuff like this, but I didn't think anything about it. I don't think I hung out that much with a lot of other Asians, especially in the high school and junior high years. At the time, I was doing a lot of swimming in school. So between sports and school, there wasn't a whole lot of time to be hanging out anyway. Um, but so the most of the people I was hanging out with were mostly people on my teams, and there were very few Asians on the swim team, very, very few at the time. Um, in college in Boston, again, school was difficult, took a lot of time, and I was swimming at the time in college as well. So between those two, again, there's not a lot of hanging out except for the guys you're spending all your time with, which are guys on the swim team. Um, and there was only maybe three guys that were Asian on the team at the time. Um, so, I mean, but I didn't think one thing or another, whether you're Asian or not Asian or whatever. I know there were large vocal Asian groups on campus. Um, I was not really involved in most of them. Just because I just didn't have a lot of time, not necessarily that I was interested or not. After I finished school, I worked in New York City as a consultant, a healthcare consultant. And that's probably where I actually started hanging out more with Asian people, um, Koreans, Chinese, some Japanese, and it was actually very unique because I probably hadn't spent a lot of time hanging out with other Asians that were my age until that time. Um, and it, I mean, it felt comfortable in an odd way to see other people that were like me, that kind of had the same first generation background, but were Americanized. I think, when you hang out with some Asians that are more like kind of fresh off the boat, it's like you're not Asian enough. And then you hang out with some non-Asians and then you're non-American enough. So you're kind of in that middle zone. And it was probably the first time I started hanging out with people where I felt like I'm not in that weird spot anymore. Um, and it was very comfortable and it was very fun. And, it's just something you didn't think about anymore. And I mean, just on a practical kind of interesting level, some of the jokes that you can make about, family backgrounds and stuff, people get that. You're like, well, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Or, you can joke about foods. Oh, yeah, this is worse than, whatever, And then like, oh yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah, I used to have to eat that too when I was growing up. Um, so it was just oddly comfortable. In when I came back, I came to Houston for medical school. Um, you know, it there were at that time there weren't as many Asians there, or I didn't necessarily hang out with as many just because medical school is a difficult time. There's not a lot of free time. So there wasn't a ton of hanging out, but I was just hanging out with classmates where, I mean, there were some Asians, but I didn't feel like it was necessarily a more heavily Asian group. Um, I did some training in San Francisco and in LA, which have very, very large Asian groups. And that was during training. And I did find that I would hang out more with more Asians there. Um, and they were, and it was just more normal because of the prevalence of Asians. I mean, sometimes if you were even to walk on the UCLA campus, I mean, I mean, there are more Asians than non-Asians sometimes. And in fact, some of my non-Asian friends who would come to visit me probably felt a little weird, like, what's happening? Why are there so many Asians here? Um, so in that sense, you just kind of feel comfortable walking around just because people look like you. Um, so that's kind of been my experience. And now I'm back in Houston. I mean, I have Asian friends, non-Asian friends. There are a lot of, Asian people in Houston. So that's, I think it's certainly not like San Francisco or Los Angeles levels, but I think way more than Dallas. But I think that's probably been my experience uh, with regards to Asians in all these different cities and different stages in my life.
Yeah, it's very interesting how different cities have very drastically different, numbers of Asians and each individual experiences them. So thank you for sharing. And my next question is, so out of those different cities that you have lived in across the states, which place would you call home?
I would definitely call Houston home. I've been here, well, outside of growing up. Well, actually, no, they're probably pretty close, Dallas and Houston, but I would call Houston home. Um, this is where most of my children were born, but definitely all raised. This is where all of the predominant friends we have, um, where my work community is. So I would call Houston home.
Great. Next, I'm going to ask you a few questions regarding your college years and just your education. So, could you describe your undergraduate experience at Harvard University?
Sure. So like I said, I came from a big public school, and I was a swimmer, and so a lot of my identity in college comes through swimming. You know, um, Coming out of high school, I had the idea or thought that I wanted to become a doctor. So I had to make sure I was pursuing those avenues as well. I majored in, or we call it concentrated in, economics because I figured this was probably the last time I could study something other than math and science um, on my road to being a doctor. And because I realized you didn't have to study a math or science, you didn't have to major in a math or science to become a doctor. So it's like, okay, well, study something different. And then, take physics and chemistry and biochemistry as my electives. Not great electives, but I was able to take other electives. But academically, I think that worked out well. Um, Oddly enough, I did better in my electives like biochemistry and organic chemistry than I did in my major. Um, but I think that's just because that's where my, strengths lied, but I just tried to learn something different. Um, I would say academically, my time at Harvard was, I mean, it was incredible. It's an incredible place with incredible people. And it opened my eyes to just a lot of different things and different ways to see things. And we're the way they have their curriculum, you have to take a lot of certain classes in certain different categories. And so some of them are liberal arts. And I realized that I love architecture. I did not know this. And then I took a couple classes on, I took a class on Michelangelo actually, which was just phenomenal. And I loved it. And if I had seen that earlier, who knows, I might have been a fine arts major, but except I have no artistic talent besides that. Um, but it was just fascinating to see all the stuff just in terms of the breadth of stuff that he did in terms of painting, sculpture, architecture. I mean, design. I mean, it was just amazing stuff. And then that just kind of led me to looking into these other things. Um, so in terms of that, I think it was just an amazing experience and probably to the point where I didn't realize how amazing it was until I've since left. I've continued to be active with Harvard and on their boards and for some other things, partially because I know it's such a transformative experience, but not just because of the things that you learn, but the people that you meet. You meet just phenomenal people there, um, who will go on to do great things. You don't know who they are, um, but they're just very interesting people, and people always talk about the places, oh, it's very cutthroat and it's very competitive, and I never saw it as that. I think that it's a place where you get people who are very talented at a lot of different things. Um, and they're used to doing very well, and they will continue to do well. But I never felt like people did well at the cost of somebody else. I don't think they looked at it like a zero-sum game. They look at it more of, I'm going to do well. I'm going to do what it takes to do well. And I find this stuff interesting. And I'm going to do what I like because now I can study the stuff I like. If I don't like Russian history, well, I'm not taking Russian history. You know, I like physics. Great. So then they go into like crazy kind of particle theory and physics, right? And they love it. And they will elevate everybody else's game because you get two people who love Russian history. Hey, have you ever thought of this? Did you look at this author? I've never looked at that. Tell me about that. And they'll tell you about it, and that's like, oh my gosh. And then, it elevates everybody's game, and it's not a cutthroat kind of discussion. It's kind of a, hey, I love this stuff. I know you love this stuff. Let's talk about this. And there's a lot of that stuff that goes on till like 1 or 2 in the morning. It's like I think we have to go to sleep because we have class tomorrow. Because okay, all right, So there was a lot of that, but probably the most impressionable thing for me and the most formative thing was my relationship with the swim team. I swam all 4 years there. I was one of the captains my senior year. Um, I spent a lot of time swimming. We were Division 1, so we were competing against high level teams, traveling, um, having workouts before classes in the afternoons, traveling for meets, invitationals, things like that. So these are the guys I spent most of my formative time with. If we're not in the pool, and we're not studying, then okay, I'm probably hanging out with these guys, going to parties with these guys. These guys are telling me avoid this. Okay, you want to go into medicine? I'm already 3 steps ahead of you. I'll tell you what you got to do. Avoid these classes. So it was almost like a brotherhood, I guess, closest to a fraternity as you could get. You know, but those were probably my most formative memories that I have. Of winning Eastern championships with these guys. You know, setting a team record. I mean, these are the things that I remember, the things that I carry with me, even more than the classes, that I took.
Yeah, I can only imagine, spending all the time practicing with them, competing with them, like how meaningful of relationships you got out of that swimming experience. Um,
I'll add that I think that, and this is true for almost all sports and athletic teams, or not just sports and athletic teams, but other teams, when you are at that level and you spend that much time, because I mean, we're literally spending, gosh, at that time, I can't even tell you how many hours. It's like almost like a full-time job. And especially now, I think it's even more competitive. But when you suffer and with a group of people and you train, and this goes for like academic teams or whatever kind of teams you're talking about, you have a bond, right? When you go through trial and tribulation, and you kind of suffer with other people, it brings you closer. I mean, to people that you would not necessarily be friends with, but having gone through something very, very hard brings people together in a way that just being friendly doesn't, and then that's, I think that's part of the reason, because I think in normal life, I say normal, but in a normal daily routine, I'm sure I wouldn't have crossed paths with several of these people, um, or necessarily even become friends with them. And a lot of these guys, I mean, I still keep in touch with them, and this is 30 years later, and if I have a problem or something like this, even if I haven't talked to them in a couple of years, I can pick up the phone or send a text, and I'm on the phone with them, and hey, what can I do to help you? I know these guys in New York who can do this or solve this for you. And, so it's it's nice, and it's probably actually something I didn't think about and didn't appreciate as much until now that you're older and away from it.
yeah, that sounds amazing. And I'm specifically curious, do you think that these experiences and realizations you had while being a part of the swim team shapes, your identity today, and even things like how you practice in your clinic and how you work with your clinic team?
100%. It's, part of being, and I didn't necessarily I didn't realize this as I was going through this, but yes, especially when you're as a physician running your own office. I mean, I'm even the president of our group now. You learn how to work as a team. You learn how to accomplish things as a team. Um, and I think it changes your perspective of top level athletes like to get the job done, and they do it and they don't complain, right? And so that's a unique trait that I think, I don't want to say it's unique to student athletes, but I think it's a very common trait. And this is part of the reason I actually like people who were high level athletes, either in high school or in college, because I know that they will grind, they not complain, and they will get the job done, one way or another. It may not be the most efficient way, but they will get it done. And they can work on a team. You can, they can take criticism, they can hear it and, internalize it and then use it to drive them. Um, and I've taken those lessons myself to just, when you think you can't get it done, you're going to get it done. Just whatever you got to do. Okay, you sleep less. Okay, you come up with a routine. Let me just sleep for 15 minutes and I'll get up and do this. Okay, just do this one step at a time. And my kids, they get mad at me because I always tell them, be like an ant, you know, just move one grain of sand at a time. And next thing you know, you will have moved a mountain, but you got to start. Look, I'm just like anybody else. I can procrastinate like the best of them. But when I have to get it done, you just be like an ant. just one grain of sand at a time, and you will surprise yourself, you know. So yes, I do apply that to almost everything that I do now.
Yeah, that's very beautiful to see how all those realizations still carry on with you to this day. And now I wanted to ask, so after your undergraduate years, could you tell me about your experiences at the Baylor College of Medicine and specifically being the class president and taking the leadership role there as well?
Sure. So, prior to once I finished college, I actually got accepted to medical school, and I actually took a year off to work in New York City as a consultant. And mostly this was familial because my father at the time, who worked in the defense industry, lost his job for some time, and my brother was actually going to school or about to start school, so we were going to have a kind of a financial crunch there. So I decided to work for a year. So during that spring, I did recruiting as well as applying to medical school, and I, was fortunate enough to find a job in New York City. So that helped because my brother is 4 years behind me, so he started just as I was leaving, and he actually went to Harvard as well. Uh, but so I did that for a year, but then took off a year, went to Baylor. Um, Medical school is hard, and I think it's much harder now than it was before, just because there is more material, right? And more is known. Um, so look, I thought it was hard. It was a different way of learning stuff for me compared to college. I think in college, I probably maybe took a total of three multiple choice tests. Everything was a, essay kind of what we call the blue book test. You had to write on those lines or whatever. Um, but I rarely took a multiple choice test. And then in medical school, it's just volume and a lot of memorization. Um, there's understanding, but it's just so much of that. And so that was it was hard for me to adjust to that. Um, I mean, did I go through probably clinical depression with the amount of stuff that we had to do and all that stuff? And yeah, and as an economics major, right, I had to kind of make double time to learn the stuff because other friends of mine or classmates, oh yeah, I already had anatomy and physiology in college. I was like, they taught that in college? You know, this was not an option at Harvard. So I didn't know this stuff. It was all new to me. So I felt like, I was kind of behind the eight ball, which wasn't ideal, but okay, you just have to work four times as hard, right? So, I did. Um, I, at the time in medical school, I kind of made the conscious decision that I needed to be more active in the community, right? I think at Harvard, I was more, more active on the team, right? And I saw the importance of that, of taking a role in the communities that you're at. And that's what kind of made me think, I need to, I want to run for an office. I want to help out. I want to give back, and so to do that, you got to have a role, you know, put yourself in there and make a difference. So that's what kind of prompted me or motivated me to try to run for an office, which I had not done. Didn't really have an officer position in high school in like the big student government. I mean, I think I may have been officers in some of these smaller things, but that's not like being student class president or something like this. And so, I ran for class officer and was elected president for a few years there. And I just try to be active, try to make a difference. One of the traditions which I know that they are still doing is something called the white coat ceremony. So for doctors, you spend your first 2 years or whatever in the classroom, and then and things change a little bit, but after that, you kind of go into the hospitals. That's when you start seeing patients. That's when you start putting the stuff you've learned to work. And then you got to wear a white coat, right? And so people used to just buy their white coat at the store or whatever in the bookstore, and then just go on out. And then me and some of these other guys on our committees were like, we need to make this more special. And so we created, I mean, the very first ceremony at Baylor, the white coat ceremony. And that's something that, I've been proud of, and I still see it now because they keep asking us for donations. Um, but that's a tradition that's continued to go. When I was at Baylor, I was also on the um, student interview committee, because I thought that it was important for students to have a say in who gets accepted, because I think that students will see different things in applicants that more seasoned interviewers who've been in practice for a long time may not see. You're just closer to it. And so then if you see something, I mean, because you want to avoid bad situations, right? Or bad applicants. So that's something I got involved in a lot. And we actually did not have students on the admissions committee until we started making, so I said, hey, you know what? I think this is a good idea. What do you guys think of this? And so then they started doing that. I'm guessing they still have that now. I'm not sure. And I kind of continued this idea with the admission stuff even during my residency for ophthalmology training. So we did not have residents on the board for the admissions committee, and now we have them. And we do even different events for applicants as they come in, especially because in residency you're talking a much smaller number. You're talking a program of maybe a class of anywhere from 4 to 6 people, or even maybe 2. So if you can see if one is a bad apple, then it's going to make your whole training very, very difficult. So that's something that I've continued. And in fact, in my group now, my medical group, I'm head of our recruiting committee now for those similar reasons. But I mean, I've just kind of continued that. I mean, I'm now president of our group as well. But this just is the whole idea of giving back. I'm fortunate to be where I am, to have the opportunities I've had. And so it's just kind of paying it forward to other people who, you know, sometimes just need a little help to get over a hump. And then once they get over, then they're going great. And then hopefully they pay it forward, so that's kind of my MO, so to speak.
Yeah, that's incredible. I am a pre-medical student myself, so I've heard things like white coat ceremonies and student interviewer committees, but I always assumed they were like a long time thing, but it's so
Well,
incredible.
technically, it still is a long time thing because that's 25 years ago. So I was in medical school a while back. So yeah, actually it's more than 25 years ago. But yes, so technically it is a long time thing now.
Well,
So
I was thinking like 100 years back, but that's very amazing
yeah,
to.
so we didn't have that before, and that's
Yeah.
why I was like, this should be more special. How do we make it more special?
Hmm.
Because I still remember the first time we had the ceremony, and we had all the students, we had everybody in the auditorium. The presidents were making different speeches and stuff like this, saying how important it is. And the faculty was in there, and I mean, we didn't know if it's going to take off or not. So it's like anytime you start something, you don't know what's going to happen. Um, but it's nice to see literally, a quarter of a century later, they're still doing it, and I'm sure I think it may be a bigger deal now. Maybe parents show up. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't, you know, been involved. I know they ask us to donate to buy the coats for people, which is fine. I'm happy to do that. But yeah, so there you have it.
Oh yeah, that it is for sure a huge deal because even my upperclassmen friends who are in medical school now, they tell me about how their families fly in to watch the ceremonies and stuff. So thank you for your efforts. Um, yeah, and my next question for you is, so at what point in your life were you inspired to practice medicine? And, were there any specific memories, mentors, friendships, or realizations that prompted you into this field?
So the short answer is yes. There are many role models and mentors who helped get me where I am now. To say that I did this on my own, or you know, I'm self-made or whatever, it would be an arrogant mess, and just it just would be wrong. Um, it takes a village, and I appreciate that, I've wanted to be a doctor ever since I was pretty young, and that didn't change as I went through um, junior high and high school. Coming from an Asian background, parents like to, they they like to say, "Oh, you should be a doctor or an engineer." And in fact, interestingly enough, my parents kept saying, "Don't you want to be an engineer? Your dad's one, and you're good at math." And you know, but I don't think I liked it as much. I was like, it's I don't like it as much. So, um, but they actually wanted me to be an engineer. But between different um, professors, even classmates. I mean, the list is very, very long, but I'll tell you, I mean, there are so many experiences because I thought I wanted to be a general medicine person because I just liked all the stuff. And then I found out that you could be a doctor of just the eyes, and I've always been drawn to eyes and I never thought about it. And I was like, you could do that. And then I learned more about that field. And the more I learned about it, I mean, I thought this was incredible. And in fact, I remember this is even before I knew what kind of doctor. I didn't even know what kind of doctors there were at the time. I mean, I come from an engineer family, no doctors in our families. And then my one of my advisors in medical school, or not in medical, in college, was actually an ophthalmologist. And he was in training, he was doing his fellowship. And so he kind of guided me and all this stuff. And I remember as a senior, he said, well, why don't you come join us in surgery? I was like, okay, and then so I'm sitting here where they're doing microsurgery on through a microscope, and they were throwing stitches, and it's like, why don't we have Dr. O, and it wasn't a doctor, but I think he said that because the patient's awake, cut this stitch, and I was like, oh my gosh, and so I'm supposed to bring these tiny little scissors to cut this one stitch, and I didn't know this at the time, but my microscope was inverted. So everything is backwards, right? So you move this way, but it looks like it's coming this way on the screen, in the microscope. And I didn't know this. I didn't know what to compare it to because I'm sitting there watching. I'm not doing anything, so it doesn't matter what side people are coming from. Um, and I eventually cut it. And then after the surgery, I said, wow, this is so hard. I can't believe you can do surgery like this. Everything is backwards and upside down. They said, what are you talking about? Like, oh my gosh, your scope was inverted. I was like, what? What do you know what that means? They were laughing at me for days because that was like, oh my gosh. I was like, how this is like amazing. I cannot believe you do what you do. Um, but actually that was probably the first time I was, exposed to that. I still didn't know I wanted to do ophthalmology, but it's very funny because when I look back now, that one person who was a fellow is now a chairman in Tennessee, and I still see him because I actually am one of the oral board examiners for the Board of Ophthalmology, and so is he, and so we see each other. And I knew him when he was a fellow in training, and now he's gone to different professorships, and now he's the chairman of a of a department of medicine, and it's just a very small world. In fact, I mean, it gets smaller because some of the students because I teach at Baylor as well now, and some of my own students who I've trained have now been on the board of different things or different groups or president of these different groups across the country. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what you're doing now? You got to be kidding me. How long ago did you graduate? Like 5 years ago? No, Dr. O, that was 15 years ago. It's like, oh, I'm like, okay, all right, let's stop playing this game. But congratulations, this is great. Good to see you again. Um, so that's heartwarming to see kind of those connections, even though you haven't seen people connect. Um, but I'll tell you, just especially as I get closer to doing ophthalmology training, I've had so many people, especially in ophthalmology, kind of direct me, guide me. Do you want to go academics? Do you want to go private practice? What's the best way to think about this? So, I mean, at different stages of my life, there have been so many people that have just said, do this or do that, think about this or think about that, or this is the way you should approach this. I mean, the list would really be endless, but I think the key with all of this is that number one, you have to keep your ears open, right? You have to be willing to listen because a lot of times our problem is we think we know the answers and we're pretty sure we know the answers. And so we don't listen. But and this is, one of the things, I've one of the tenets that has kind of guided me is if you're willing to listen, people will tell you something you don't know, you know. And so I've tried to listen. Am I 100% successful? No, but that's something I try to do because even when we think somebody can't teach us something, if you listen long enough, they have something to tell you that will elevate your game. Sometimes we don't have enough time to listen to it, or if it takes longer to come out. Um, but I've realized, especially when somebody is willing to teach you, um, and you're willing to listen, they'll teach you more, and you just have to close your mouth and open your ears, you know. Um, you know, what's the joke? God gave you one mouth and two ears for a reason, right? Um, but these people have guided me and maybe it's all not, I don't necessarily have to agree with everything. And sometimes some of my best advisors have given me advice that at the time I couldn't even understand why that was a good thing. But I just implicitly trusted these people, and literally 5, 10 years down the road, I'm like, oh, I see the wisdom in that now. I get it. Okay, I'm glad I listened to you. And, because some of these people are just, okay, whatever you say, I'm going to do it. And if I don't understand it, I will eventually understand it because my brain can't wrap around it yet. Um, and it's funny to see that come true. Um, so the short answer is yes, I've had so many people, and even now to this day, I have people who give me advice about all these different things. And I'm just like, oh, that's a good way of thinking about it. I just never thought of that, and it just kind of opens your brain to thinking of stuff. But, as we get older, the brain doesn't want to listen as much. And we think we know a lot of answers and may or may not be right. But, that's what happens when we get older, I suspect.
Yeah, that's great to hear how you were able to, open your ears to so many mentor figures throughout your career. And now it's a full circle, now that you have your own mentees. Um, and my next question for you is how would you describe the emotional demands and responsibilities of your career? Like, what are some of the most frequently felt emotions in your day-to-day life as you practice?
So, from my day-to-day experience as a doctor, there are some significant mood swings in a given day. Um, the best ones are just joy. I mean, I do eye surgery to have somebody who is blind and can now see and just appreciate that. And that's just, it's hard to put into words. You know, I mean, I've had people who literally the day after surgery are crying in my room because it's like, I've never seen like this. This is incredible. They couldn't do anything because they couldn't see. They just walking around. I mean, imagine if you were underwater with your eyes open. That's how their whole life was. And it couldn't get any better for whatever reason, something about their eye. And then you fix that, and all of a sudden they can see their own face again, see just they couldn't drive, they couldn't get around, they couldn't, see what was happening. So that's probably the most rewarding, right? Um, day to day, I mean, whenever you do anything day to day, there are a lot of things that become routine, in terms of regular checks and things like this. Um, on the other end, there are things that are very, very difficult. Sometimes you have to tell people bad news as a physician, and nobody likes to tell people bad news, right? Um, and sometimes I mean, to say to somebody, you know what, you can't see, and I can't fix that. This is not your fault. This is not anybody. Maybe it is their fault, and you can't see. You are going to be blind, or you're going to lose this eye, right? Or luckily, I don't have to do this. You're going to die, right? These are hard discussions you have to have with people. Um, and it's still hard for me, but it is something I have to do every day, right? So I mean, I feel like I've gotten better at having difficult decisions like that. Um, but those are not easy decisions to have, um, or discussions to have rather. Uh, so that's probably some of the harder stuff I have to do. It can be very frustrating at times, because people have different expectations. You know, you do surgery on somebody, for example, but they expected something else, and this is not what I got, or my body didn't do this, but I should have that, and they don't understand that, and they become very frustrated. They become very mad. Um, Everything went right, but it wasn't what they expected. So that can become very frustrating, or there's a misunderstanding about something else. And then people can just get upset, or people can, people get upset for any kind of reasons. Look, I get upset for all different things. And, somebody waits too long. You know, you said I was going to be seen at 10:15, it's 10:30. This is unacceptable. I was like, well, I apologize for the delay. We're trying the best we can, you know, but they won't accept it. And so that can become very frustrating. So in the course of a day, in the course of a morning, I mean, in the course of literally a 30-minute period, I can go through all of these things, you know, um, and that's a typical day, you know, and that's just dealing with patients, dealing with insurance companies. That's a whole nother frustration. Um, I do a lot of the administrative stuff for my group, you know, that has its own frustrations and things like this, and pulls you away from your patient care and stuff like this. So, I mean, we have all these different kind of, you know, areas where you go through ups and downs, you have different challenges, you just try your best to not get too emotional and too caught up in it, and do the best you can, and try to, keep the end in sight, and, try to be fair to people, and try to give people respect and hear them. And I think that helps with it. Does it solve everything? No. But I think, um, if you can deal with people fairly, and they know you're trying to help them and not hurt them, that you're on their side, and you're trying to do what's fair. Sometimes what they want is not fair, and you kind of got to tell them that, and just be honest with them, because usually when you're lying, people can tell. They may feel it, they may not know why you're lying, they may not know whatever, you know, but they can feel it. I think what Maya Angelou, she's, attributed to, they may not remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel, right? I think that's not exactly her quote, but something like that. Um, and I think that's 100% true. And I've kind of taken that to heart. A lot of times there's a lot of complicated stuff in medicine. People don't understand what you're saying, but they understand how they feel afterwards, and so I try to be cognizant of that, because as a physician, we get very caught up in facts, numbers, your creatinine's this and whatever. They're like, what does that mean? What is creatinine? Why is that important? Um, what's a cataract? What's retinopathy? What's my eye what I don't know. What does that mean? Why is it important? It's like, it's under control. You're doing fine. Great. Don't worry about it. I'll see you in 6 months, right? Something like that. But so those are kind of emotionally, mentally, the things I go through kind of on a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's always very admirable and interesting to hear about the emotions behind, the technical, objective aspects of healthcare. So, yeah.
So the one thing I'll add too, especially because you're in kind of the beginning phase of all this, is that um, this is all an evolution, right? In terms of the way you see patients, deal with patients, and things like this. And you're talking to somebody who's, I mean, I've been seeing patients for a long time, like literally 30 years now, right? So the things you go through in the beginning, like when you're in medical school, I mean, you don't know anything, and you're talking to patients, and a lot of times the patients know you don't know anything either. You're a student, you have a short coat instead of a long coat. Um, so you will go through different phases in terms of how you deal with patients, what you're feeling, because especially in the beginning, there's a lot of insecurity. I don't know what you have. Not only do I not know what you have, I definitely don't know what to do for it, right? And especially even after you finish medical school and now you do residency, it's like you're learning what you're supposed to learn. So in the beginning, you don't know what it is you're supposed to learn. You know, I got to learn the stuff. But then there's another stage after you finish residency. Now you're starting in practice and you're on your own. You don't have professors next to you saying, that's not what this is. This is what this is. This is how you have to deal with this. You're on your own. So then there's a lot of questioning. Do I know what's going on? What do I do for this? And so there's a lot of insecurity. And then how do I talk to patients? How do I communicate this? Is this good news? Is this bad news? How do I tell them this is what you need? I don't believe you. I don't know. This is not what I need. This is what you need. You know, you're going to die if we don't do this. What? What are you talking about? Come on. You know, so there is an entire evolution. So I'm giving you kind of the end picture now where things are more at steady state and I know most of what I'm doing. You know, I feel pretty comfortable with like what I can do and can't do. Um, so the things that I felt earlier, yeah, things are changed. So, but that's the whole thing, idea of growth and but you know, but just I'm giving you a preview of how things look 30 years down the road.
Yeah, thank you for the preview. Now that I think about it, yeah, I think it's incredible how a person must develop from medical school to, like 30 years down the road. It's a huge transformation.
Yeah, it's a big process, and I think especially in the stage where you're at, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel because there's a huge mountain you have to climb, and that mountain gets bigger and bigger. And I see it because I mean I teach medical students and teach residents, right? So I see the amount of stuff that you're going to have to be responsible for, depending on what fields you want to go into, and just getting into medical school is hard. Getting into residency is getting hard. I mean, everything is getting harder. It's everybody's game is kind of upping, and it's just a lot of people will drop off that rail, right? Which is fine, right? Because that field doesn't have enough space for necessarily all the people who want to go in. But all of these, there are a lot of good exit spots for people who want to go into this stuff. That maybe that's not your cup of tea. And I mean, there are drawbacks to being a doctor in the medical field, you know, that you may think, oh, it's kind of like the person who climbs this tall ladder and you get to the top of the ladder and you're top of the building and you said, wait, I'm on the wrong building. I need to be on that building, right? And so then you spend all this time and energy, but you should have asked the question, is this really where I want to go? Right? Because otherwise it's a long road. And sometimes we just get so tunnel vision, this is the next step, this is the next step, that we forget to ask, is this really what I want to do? Right? Because you can get so far down the road where you feel like I can't turn back now. Right? But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And my next question for you is, what do you see as your biggest achievements in your career so far?
My biggest achievement in my career, like my doctor's career, you mean?
Yeah, or
Or
it could be anything.
yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say because I don't think of it that way. I mean, I feel like I've accomplished a lot of things and I've been fortunate to do that. Um, I mean, like for example, I had a school record in my event, right? And I literally just found out like literally a year and a half ago, my record still is standing at my high school, which is literally more than 30 years now. And in fact, one of my old coaches just texted me that my club team record was just broken like this past year. And it stood for like, I don't know, 32 years or something like this. So I was like, oh, I didn't think about that, right? Um, I mean, I have great memories of like winning Eastern championships in my event, literally by 1/100th, which was incredible. It was incredible for the team. It was exciting. It was exhilarating. Um, but you got to go, what's the next thing? right? It's not, you don't necessarily, I mean, at the time, you think this is the greatest thing you've done, oh, I got my medical degree, great. I got this teaching position, great. I got this fellowship, great. I got this grant, great. You know, I got this position now, great. But this the time you stop and say, oh, this was the pinnacle. You're done, right? I don't know if I'm dodging the question, but I don't really look back and say, I mean, my life is about my kids and my family now, right? So it's like, they're born. Well, being born is not as huge an accomplishment, right? But they've done this. I've helped them to do this. I got to coach their little league team. We won you know, the 12U World Series for West U. That was super exciting. That was a big deal, and at the time that was a huge deal. I got to be one of the coaches on the All-Star teams. This was a big deal. People wanted to do this. I coached a select softball team, and we made it to Colorado, did all this other stuff. I mean, it was exciting stuff. Some of my players have gone on to play in college. As a matter of fact, one of them is playing for Princeton now. These are great things that I am proud of. Um, I don't, I mean, people really don't ask me what I do that much. So it's kind of, I do a lot of interviews. So I'm usually the one asking the questions. So I don't really sit back and spend a lot of time thinking about these things. Just as because I just more focus on what are you doing next? What are the things you have to do? How are you going to get that done? You know, how are you going to help this person? How are we going to fix this in the company? How am I going to help this patient with this problem? Um, this is complicated. I don't know what I need to do. Let's think about this. Let's make some strategy to come up with this. My kid can't do this. Okay, well, how do we help him or her get this thing that they want to do? How can I help them with this? So that's kind of the way I operate. So I don't really spend. So I don't have a good answer. I feel like I've been fortunate to be part of a lot of incredible things, which have been very fun, very exhilarating, very rewarding. Um, but I don't know if I have a greatest hits kind of answer.
No, yeah, that's a perfect answer. I wanted to just see, how you would define accomplishments and how you view them. So, yeah, thank you for your response. And next, I know you mentioned like the different professional organizations you're a part of here and there, but could you speak a little more about them? So you mentioned like the Harvard Club of Houston, Chinese American Doctors Association of Houston, and any other ones.
Sure. Yes, I think the things that I'm most active in now, right, are things with my work, right? Like involved in the administration. I'm now the president of our group. It's an elected position. It's like being a managing partner. So in that respect, I'm helping to do a lot of the day-to-day stuff, help run this, running meetings, coordinating stuff. In general, my activity of these different groups and clubs is just along the theme of just giving back, right? And making a difference. I don't, I mean, I'm not in the position where I need to add a resume. I don't need participation in these things. Frankly, nobody really cares anymore at my age. I'm not applying for any jobs. Um, so I don't need that stuff. I mean, it's when you're at different stages, yeah, things are different. But the way I approach things now, I mean, look, when you're in high school and things like this, you want to be, oh, I'm involved in this. This is what I should do. This is what I shouldn't do. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Fine. Now that I've become older and more mature, it's what are things that I believe in? Where do I think I can make a difference? And what impact can I have to help out? Right. So for the Harvard Club, I'm actually on the board. I run their schools committees where we actually staff college fairs in the high schools. So there are different events, and we have staffed literally over a 3-week period over 70 events at different independent school districts between Galveston to Beaumont to College Station, and I coordinate that, because I think that's important. It's an important outreach for us. So I do that. I do interviews for Harvard as well, for students, high school students applying to college. So I'm part of that board as well, because it's just kind of giving back. Do I get paid for it? No, but I think it's important, to be an ambassador for things that you believe in. Um, that's kind of what I've done for the Houston Eye Associates. I've also been on the foundation, which is our charitable arm that does charitable work. I've been on that board. Um, the Chinese Doctors Association, I've been an officer in that. I don't play as large a role as I did in the past, just because I'm doing other things now. But that's kind of, um, the stuff I do. I teach at Baylor as well, right? I think teaching is, I like teaching. And I think I have things that I can teach residents, especially ophthalmology residents, that are going to be useful for them clinically, surgically, and even like career-wise. So I feel like I can add value to them. So I've been teaching on the Baylor staff for 15, 17, 19 years, somewhere in there. I kind of lost track. Actually, no, it's got to be 19 because I've been with the Houston Eye Associates for 19 years. So yeah, I guess it's 19 years now. So ever since I came back to Houston. And actually, when I was in Los Angeles, after I finished my residency there, when I graduated, I actually stayed in town for about a year and a half. My first child was born there. But then I did teach. I had an office there and I did teach at UCLA, taught the residents, because at that point I know the program and, so, they brought me on to teach and be one of their attendings before coming back to Houston.
Yeah, that's very admirable to hear, how you're motivated by the idea of giving back. And next, I wanted to ask a few questions specifically regarding the intersection between Asian American identity and medicine. So first, eyes of different races have different medical issues sometimes, right? So how do you have special considerations when treating Asian versus non-Asian patients in your practice?
Some, it I don't really see the patients as either Asian, non-Asian, or African American, Hispanic. It's not. I People's different eyes have different problems, right? So I look at it more as the problems that your eyes may have, right? Do Asians have more? Are they more likely to have something like narrow angle glaucoma? Yes, they are. Are they more likely to be more nearsighted in general? Sometimes yes, sometimes way more nearsighted, which puts them at certain risk of things like retinal detachments. Um, but it's not because they're Asian. I have Caucasian people who have this problem. I have Hispanic people who have this problem. I have Black people who have this problem. So I look at it more as problem focused in terms of patients. So that's the way I deal with it. Everybody has problems that they didn't want, right? They didn't ask for. They have macular degeneration. So I think all of these problems, um, I don't want to say are independent of race because when we talk about race, you're talking about genes, right? And genes, some people are more predisposed to having some than others, but yeah, that's kind of the way I deal with that. I think on the flip side of that, being an Asian physician, I think has more issues than the patient wise, right? And there's, I think, a prejudice that goes both ways. I remember when I was kind of starting practice, um, patients would call the office to make an appointment or something, and they would say, "Does he speak English?" You know, or they didn't want to come, or like, what is that last name? Oh, what is that? Um, there's also the positive bias. They're like, oh, I only want Asian doctors because I think they're better or whatever. Um, And it's not necessarily coming from Asians. It could come from, a black person or a white person or whatever. Like, oh, I want all my doctors to be Asian. So there's that. But, you know, we always have to deal with other people's, prejudices as well, you know. So that's, I mean, that's the reality. I mean, especially in Texas, where you may run into more people who have that idea than if you were in California, just because there's more exposure to Asians. Um, so, so you have to deal with that when you're seeing patients and dealing with people too.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of, like exposure to people of Asian descent, what are your thoughts on the representation of Asian Americans in the general US healthcare scene, as well as like specifically in the field of ophthalmology, if that's applicable?
I think Asians are well represented in medicine. I think Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, you know, probably not as many Japanese, just because I think there's just not as many Japanese people in America. But I think we have a strong representation, stronger than our general numbers are, you know. And is it related to, I mean, who you could make all kinds of argument what it's related to, just family background, work ethic, you're better at math and science. I don't have a good answer for you, but I think we are well represented. And I think generally speaking, in the medical field, we have generally pretty good reputation. Um, you know, whether it's true or not for every single person, of course, that's not going to apply for everybody. I mean, those are stereotypes, but I think Asians are well represented in medicine.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And what are your thoughts on, I know you touched on this a little bit, but what are your thoughts on perceptions such as like model minority or bamboo ceiling? And have you personally experienced, witnessed, or overcame these ideas?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I think that being the quote unquote ideal minority can be a blessing, it can be a curse, right? And I'll speak that from my children's perspective, right? It's it's hard when you have reputations to live up to, you know, um, whether they're good or bad. Sometimes that brings people down and they can't take it. Sometimes it motivates them and says, I need to live up to this and I can do that, and it affects people differently. Um, is it fair? No, it's not fair, you know, but it's how we deal with the reality that we're given. I mean, I feel like my children probably have a lot of pressure. I went to Harvard. My wife went to University of Pennsylvania. So, people say, oh, your children are double Ivy. I mean, what are they going to do? Well, I mean, your dad did all this in sports. What are you going to do? So you can't escape some of the stuff that surrounds you. Um, but it's how you deal with it. Is there a bamboo ceiling? Yeah, sure there is. Absolutely. You know, is that the entire picture? No, it's not. You know, are there successful Asians that do all these things that can, make it to the top of any kind of whatever in terms of politics, business, investment banking, whatever? Absolutely, yes. Is it harder for some of these people? Yeah, it is. Do they necessarily, can they play the, you know, jock stereotype? Some can, some can't, right? It's just, but that's kind of the reality that we have to deal with. And I think until um, more people get into more positions and there's more exposure, people will realize that, hey, we're all kind of alike, right? We all kind of want the same thing. We all want security. We all want our families to do well. We want to be secure. We want, you know, to do nice, fun things. We kind of all want the same things. Can you do that without having to put somebody else down? Well, that would be ideal, right? Not everybody believes that. So, and they think I get to go up if you go down. I mean, so I don't have a good answer for you, but I think that is definitely a reality. And it's a reality that we have to deal with, and it's how we deal with it that kind of makes who we are. and how we want to go through life. I mean, I think a lot of people will go through with a chip on their shoulder saying, you guys, you owe me because of whatever, and that's one way to go about it. There's another one that says, you know what, these bad things have happened to me, and I'm going to go forward and I'm going to get the job done. Okay. I mean, it's your own philosophy, and people get caught up in the story that they tell themselves, and so we have to make sure, I think, we tell ourselves a story that will help get us to where we want to go without bringing us down, because there's plenty of things that can bring us down, right? And if you get caught in that whirlpool, it can go south real fast. And do bad things happen? Yes, every day, absolutely. And it's, how you approach things, and as a matter of fact, I was just telling my brother, because we were just having this discussion, and there's a Chinese fable I used to read to my children when I used to read books and stuff, that, and this may, there's a lot of, I mean, I guess 100% correct, but there's this Chinese farmer who has a son, and then he has, everybody's go, oh, you had a son. This is fantastic. You're so lucky. That's so great. Maybe, maybe not, and then the son says, you know what? I want to be a lawyer. I don't want to work in the fields. And then the people say, oh, you're so unfortunate. He wants to, he wants to do this. He can't help you now. Now you got to do it all yourself. That's terrible. And then he just finds a wild horse. Oh, you're so lucky. You found a horse. He found a horse for you. Now you can help. Now that can help you in the fields. He's like, well, maybe, maybe not. His son falls off the horse, breaks his leg, can't go to school. Oh, that's so unfortunate. He can't go to school now. He's got a broken leg. Maybe, maybe not. The emperor comes around, takes everybody's firstborn son. We're going to war. Oh, I can't take you. You have a broken leg. Oh, you're so lucky. He can't go to war now. Oh, that's great. Maybe, maybe not. Right. So, how we think what's good or bad at the time, we think it's the worst thing that happened. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Or you think this is the best thing that's ever happened. Well, maybe, maybe not. So it's just how you respond to it and go forward, I think, and I remember when I heard that story, when I was reading it to them, it's always stuck with me, because maybe it's good, maybe it's not, but you just go forward.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And my next question for you is, what does your Taiwanese heritage mean to you?
It means a lot to me because it tells me where I came from and what my parents and my family have gone through to give me the opportunities I have now. Um, it's something I don't think I appreciated it as much when I was younger, because you don't have a good comparison for stuff. But I think the older I become and the more I see it, the more important it's become to me and the more I appreciate it. Is it just because they were Taiwanese? Maybe, maybe not. I think that other people and families have similar work ethics or whatever because of who they are and how they were brought up. Um, so could other people have the background and impact that I felt that my ancestors have had and bestowed upon me? Yes, I do. Um, but I do see how the struggles that my grandparents went through, or great grandparents, because, they went through, World War I, they got, taken over by the Japanese, and my grandparents could speak Japanese or Taiwanese. They couldn't even speak Mandarin because the Chinese take over, and then they're forcing people to speak Mandarin. I remember the grandkids couldn't talk to the grandparents because I'd say, when I went to go visit, what did he say? They're like, I don't know, we don't speak Taiwanese. I was like, what do you mean you don't speak Taiwanese? He lives right here. You don't know what he's saying? No, I don't know what he's saying. Because he's speaking Taiwanese. They're forcing us to speak Mandarin in schools, So just when you see struggles like that and the hardships they probably went through that I fully don't even understand, I mean, forget about refrigerators. I mean, my grandmother would have to walk like 2 miles just to go to the farmer's market kind of thing every day and get food back and do this. And that was what she did literally till she was 90 years old, you know? Um, and we kind of take a lot of that stuff and the stuff we do for granted, but it makes you appreciate what they did and the things that they went through for me to be where I am now, right? And hopefully my children at some point, while I'm still alive, may appreciate that as well. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't think about it. It's just that's your reality. And then as you get older, your perspectives changes and you see different things and then you start to have different realizations. So
Yeah, for sure. And next, my question for you is, are there any hobbies, sports, religion that you enjoy engaging in?
yeah, there's there's a lot of stuff. I have a lot of different hobbies. I mean, I've always liked to do a lot of different things. Um, it's just we're kind of limited by time. Photography, I love playing golf. Have I done a lot of this recently? No. Um, I love spending time with my children and their sports. Like my oldest one did a lot of softball, so I was involved with that. My middle one does a lot of field hockey, so I go with that, and I help them to train as much as I can just to help them out. My son did basketball. He's doing basketball now. He used to do baseball. So being involved in that has been priceless to me, right? So that time that I get to spend with them doing those things is some of the most rewarding things, to be able to, win a championship with my son or with my daughter, you know, they may forget about it, but it's still, I still have those memories and I'll still cling to that. And it was still to be able to share that experience with them, just like I was talking about, just on the team, you're kind of suffering together, you're training together, you know, going out when everybody is having fun and, you're training, doing practice, putting your time in, trying to get better and then getting better and then being successful. I mean, that's that's priceless to me. Now I'll have to start picking up more hobbies as they're, starting to graduate, go to college and, you know, not needing me anymore. So I get to do my own hobbies now, or starting to anyway.
Mhm. I see. And my last section of questions for you will be kind of about like your advice for the future generations. So what advice and hopes do you have for the field of ophthalmology in the coming decades?
For ophthalmology, I mean, we have had so many advances. I mean, even from the time that I started and graduated from my training till now, just in terms of technology, in terms of getting people to see better, um, helping to slow down, stop, and sometimes even reverse things like macular degeneration, controlling glaucoma. Um, these things are incredible things. And we did not have some of these things when I started practice. Um, so to be able to continue these kind of things, and especially as people are living longer to prevent these problems that a lot of people have that are genetic, has been amazing, and to be involved in that and to be able to share that with patients. I mean, it's a remarkable thing. And I mean, I hope that path continues as we learn more about genetics, more about these problems, and more about these treatments and these different drug options. Um, so that's where I hope ophthalmology continues to go.
Yeah, for sure. And my next question for you is, do you have any advice for young Asian American adults and also specifically those aspiring to work in the medical field?
So I think that the general advice I would give, and not necessarily just to Asian Americans. I mean, I don't know if you're asking me for specifically to Asian Americans or just young people in general. I would say to work hard and take things to the next level, right? Everybody can just be on cruise control and drift down the stream. Um, the people who are, and I'm assuming I'm speaking to somebody who wants to make a difference. If you don't want to make a difference, I'm not going to convince you to make a difference. But if you're convinced that you want to make a difference, then you should work hard and work hard to make yourself the best person you can be, right? No matter what field you're in. and continue to get better. The thing that the moment you think you can't get any better, you're done, right? If that's in junior high, if it's in high school, if that's when you're 30, 40, 50, 70, 80. I mean, I have patients who are literally in their 90s and they're talking about things that they want to do. And these are the most active, healthy 90-year-olds I have because they have a purpose, right? So, and then I've seen that because I see the people who are that age and healthy, or, it's the people who have a purpose. Are they necessarily working? No, not necessarily, but they are doing stuff and they're helping people. I remember one woman, she was literally 85 and she was helping other seniors at the senior center, driving them, taking them to their appointments, helping them do their stuff. And she didn't tell them, oh yeah, I'm 15 years older than you and I'm taking care of you, you know. But she was driven to do that. And she still is driven to do that. I mean, this woman's like literally almost 90 years old. I think she can't do all the things she wanted to do before, but having a purpose and having the thought that you can always do better. No matter how good you're doing, you can always do better. Having that idea will get you very, very far. You're going to have a lot of bumps in the road, but if you just kind of go with the flow and realize it's not going to be a straight path to anywhere you're going to go, that will help you be successful. And I think the other thing I think that would be helpful, and this applies a lot to Asian Americans, is that you have to have the idea or the desire to give back. This is not a natural thing, especially outside your own community. Because I know a lot of times, a lot of Asians can work hard, they can focus, and they kind of think about what do I need to do? But one of the things that will help Asians kind of get out there and get into positions where you're kind of normal and fit in is to help give back and to make a difference, right? So if you get involved, if you get involved outside of yourself, you have to interact with other people. People see what you can do and what you're capable of, and they realize, oh, okay, this is a good person. And then they will apply that stereotype that they learn from dealing with you to other Asian Americans. And then all of a sudden they give somebody a second chance that they never thought about because I don't know any Asians. I don't deal with any Asians. Oh, they're kind of normal. Oh, okay. And that will go a long way for, I think, for young Asian Americans. Because a lot of times, like I said, we can get caught up in our own things and our own achievements and accomplishments. And some people accomplish incredible things and take things to incredible levels. But when you do the path on your own and don't get involved in community, I think that can become a weakness for a lot of Asian Americans.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for your response. And my very last question for you is, if you could go back in time and give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I think if I had to go back, I would just tell myself to do what you're doing. You're not always going to be right, but just do what you're doing and soak in what you're doing, right? Because I think we get very tunnel vision, narrow-minded in terms of accomplishing the things we want to accomplish. And we forget to smell the roses or see everything else that's going around you. I mean, we all have only so much bandwidth. But I think that getting to where I've been, I've missed opportunities with people or things or situations where you want to take it in, be present in the moment. And I mean, I've been guilty of that, being focused on so many things, and trying to do the things that I've done. I wouldn't change anything that I've done, I mean, good and bad, because I think that makes who we are. it makes us tougher or weaker, you know. So I wouldn't change um, any of these things, but I would just tell myself to soak it in and be aware and be present.
Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful piece of advice for your younger self. But those are all the questions I had prepared. But did you have anything else that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think I've shared a lot, you know. As
All
my
right.
kids would say, you can stop talking, Dad. I'm not listening anymore. So